guys, welcome to this evening's virtual class on Trotline and jug fishing. I'm Chris Hearn. We're right here at 6:30. We got a few more joining us. So let's dive into what we're talking about here with the Trotline and jug fishing virtual class. Before we get started, for you guys that's joined the last few, we've been doing pre-event polls and then post-event polls, just kind of getting a judge of how much you guys are getting out of the classes. So if you guys will take just a second and fill out our pre-knowledge check-in. All right, thank you guys for that. All right, a little bit about what we're going to be talking about tonight. When we're talking about trotline and jug fishing, we're primarily talking about catfish. That's what we're going to be baiting for. In different parts of the country, they do use this same technique, especially the jugs, for catching like alligator gar and even bowfin in some of the southern states. But generally in Tennessee, we're talking about catfish. So we're going to talk about the species of catfish that's possible to catch like this, jug fishing, what it entails, how to make jugs, trotline, same thing, the types of baits, which is kind of going to be dependent on where you're fishing and the species of catfish that you're going to be fishing for. And then we're going to touch on some of the regulations around trotline and jug fishing. So the first species of catfish I want to talk about is the channel catfish, and it's probably the most widely distributed catfish across the state. A lot of the times when you hear of any kind of a lake or reservoir being stocked by TWRA from the hatchery, they're normally stocking channel catfish. And you know, one of the neat things about channel catfish is they eat almost anything. You know, they eat worms, they can be caught on liver, they can be caught on shad, crawfish. These fish really are in a lot of your faster running river systems. Over here in West Tennessee, the Hatchie River is very abundant with channel catfish. Some of the best eating fish in the state, if you ask me, out of some of these real clean bodies of water. So channel catfish can get anywhere from, 8-10 inches up to about 12 pounds. And there's some really strong fighting fish, but they're really fun to catch on both rod and reel, jugs, and trot lines. And we're going to talk a little bit more as we go through different baits and things of what these catfish eat. And then the blue cat, it's by far the biggest species. I think we actually, and I was just going to look it up while we were doing that poll, I believe that the state record, could have just been the state record, but one of the biggest blue cats ever caught in the country was caught this last year. And I mean, he was upwards of 100 pounds. I hate to say a number, but I mean, it was really, really, really big, 120, 130, something like that. As far as fish that big, most of them are in the Mississippi River system, around the Tennessee River systems when we talk about Tennessee. But there is some really big blue cats in some of these lakes from where they were stocked, back in the 80s and 90s. It takes a long time for a fish to get that big. My personal biggest catfish on a jug or a trot line was a blue at about 23 pounds out of one of the Beach River Watershed Development Authority lakes. Blue cats, they eat a lot of different stuff. They're not really picky. Normally when I'm fishing a reservoir that's going to be have a bunch of blue cats in it, I'm going to be using some kind of a cut bait, but we're going to talk about that later. And then the third species that's worth mentioning is the flathead catfish. It eats primarily live bait. If you're baiting for flatheads, you're normally using some kind of live brim or big shiners or minnows. They're really a nocturnal animal as well. They feed mostly at night. So it's not uncommon for people to bait out their trot lines or their jugs right at dark and then run them first thing in the morning or run them periodically through the night especially when you're fishing for flatheads. They're normally found in rivers that have some kind of current. Not to say they can't be found in just a lake that don't have any current in or out of it, but most of the time when I think of flatheads, I think about moving water. And then these fish can get really big as well, you know, up in the 70, 80 pound range. They're also the ones that are normally, if you've followed along with any of the videos of somebody noodling and catching them with their hands, they're normally catching flatheads. It's something about the way they like to nest, and they can kind of bait them in with those boxes. But just a little neat tidbit about those. So next, I want to talk about jugs and really what we're talking about. So basically, the principle behind jug fishing is going to be, we're going to attach something. Maybe it's literally a jug. There's a milk jug picture there. We're going to have a main line that's going to come down to some kind of a sinker, and then a hook with our bait. Sometimes you'll see something like on the right where you have a weight or even a brick, in this case, that's on the bottom, and then you have a three-way swivel with another leader coming off to a hook with your bait. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's going to be, in the follow-up email you'll receive in a couple days, that'll have the recording of this. Is also going to have some videos about how to make jugs, and there's just a ton of options. A few pieces of advice I can give you, whether you're using milk jugs, bleach bottles. I'm going to show you another technique of using, you know, like the floats, pool floats, stuff like that, pool noodles. No matter what you're doing, some advice applies to all of them. So one thing I like to do is, one, I'm going to paint them something really bright colored that I'm going to be able to see them from a distance. You know, reflective tape is a good idea if you're going to be using them at night at all. And then if I'm running the maximum number based on the body of water I'm at, so different bodies of water have a limit sometimes on how many jugs per boat or jugs per person, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the regulations part of it later. But I like to put different lengths of line on my jugs. So let's just say I've got 15. I will probably have 5 that'll have 5 foot. I might have 5 that'll have 8, and 5 that'll have 12, or something like that. And I'll write it on that actual bottle or jug. So when I pull up into a bay or something like that, I can throw out the ones that's got 5 foot of line on them into shallower water. I can throw some out into 10, 12 foot. And that way I can kind of get an idea of where those fish are. Another way of doing it is you could actually put 12 or 14 foot on each one, and then as you let your line out, you can do a half hitch around the bottle or around the lip of the bottle to be able to kind of shorten up that line if you want to. So then if you run into a situation where the fish are really biting in 8 foot of water, you can set all your jugs at the same depth and concentrate on that pattern. So just a little information there. On your jugs, they also have to be tagged and marked with the owner's name, address, and TWRA ID number. And then here's just another example of how you can build, you know, out of pool noodles. It looks like they're using bullet weights for weights. They're actually using monofilament. My granddaddy started me on building jugs, and we use styrofoam blocks a lot. And he's got some braided line. It's a little bit bigger than any kind of braided fishing line that you would see, like an 80 pound or something like that. It's a little bit bigger, and a lot of times I'll run it through a 1 ounce weight and then down to a swivel, and then maybe run a 60 pound monofilament leader from that. But there's a ton of ways you can do it, anywhere from using big monofilament all the way up to between your jug and your hook, or, you know, some kind of a nylon fishing line. Any questions about jug fishing? You know, if you've never done it, it's really a great way to enjoy catching fish from anything: pontoon boat, kayaks. You know, if it's a situation or a pond small enough that you can throw out there and hook the jug after something gets on it. It's really out there for anybody to do. And generally what I do is, you know, I've got my rods and reels with me, and I'll go to a lake, and I'll carry my jugs, maybe 10 of them. I'll bait them out, I'll throw them out, and then I'll go around and physically fish. And I might be fishing where I can keep an eye on my jugs. If I see one that's got a fish on it, I'll go take it off and rebait. Or if I go to a different part of the lake, I'll just go ahead and fish the day and then pick it up at the end. And a lot of times, with 10 or 12 jugs, I could get me 5 or 6 extra fish, just by putting those out. Adam asks if the TWRA number to be put on the jug or the license number. I believe it's your TWRA ID number. I believe is the way it's worded, and I might have it on that last slide. But if we don't cover it later, then just make sure to check your Go Outdoors Tennessee app or the fishing guide for this year. And I'll also be providing links to that. So I know I'll be sending an email that'll have the link to the answer, but I think it'll be on this last slide. Is there any type of line that you should not use on your jugs or noodles? The only thing from a safety aspect, it needs to be something that can be cut. So as long as it's not any kind of wire cable or wire leader or anything like that, I don't really see anything. The only thing I can say is if you're running like a 40-pound Power Pro braided fishing line, or even anything less than 30 or 40-pound monofilament, I think you're setting yourself up to maybe more tangles and memory compared to running something big. Because in my experience with trot lines and jugs, the catfish just don't pay any attention to that line. So just kind of make it easy on yourself. And I'm going to show you later on in this PowerPoint some things you can buy from Walmart, this actual Trotline cord, and that works just as well too. It's just a good way to keep from getting any tangles. I'm fishing out of a kayak on the Tennessee River. The 3-way swivel looks like the best bet so they don't drift off. Yeah, that's a good point. If you're fishing in some current and you're wanting them to stay remotely close to where you throw them out, then that's definitely the case. If you got a lot of snags. So in other words, if I'm going to use Lake Graham for an example for you guys that's ever fished it, but it's got a lot of laydowns in it, old trees. And if you get a hard wind and it's blowing across there, most of your jugs will wind up hung up. So that 3-way swivel would definitely come in handy in a situation like that. Rick asked, how long can you leave them out? You just want to pick them up the same day you put them out. You don't want to leave them out for, from dark of one day to dark of the next or something like that. And there might be some regulations around that where they got to be run every 24 hours or something, but if you use the PVC style things, you can put them on it. But what I've been doing, you can go to Amazon and you can look at trappers tags. They're copper tags about big as your finger probably. And it's got where you can put 3 different lines. So you can put all your information on it like that, and then just take a little, almost like a bread tie or a piece of wire and put it around it. That's what I've been doing. I just done this recently, and I think it was like, I don't know, $10 for 50 or something like that. John asked, where's the best place in the river to put jugs out? It really, based on the time of year, those catfish are moving in and out. But when I'm thinking about jugs, I'm normally putting them in some fairly shallow water. I see people throwing jugs out in the channel with lots and lots of line, but man, that's just seems like a lot of work and probably low reward to me. I would probably go back in the creeks, and even when I'm on small lakes, I still try to find secluded bays, kind of guarded from the wind and stuff like that. Catfish spend a lot of time deep, but for the most part, the ones that's actively feeding, they're pulling up and feeding in some shallower waters. What type of hooks do you recommend using for noodles or jugs? We're going to talk a little bit about this in the next slides because I use basically the same ones on trot lines and jugs, and it's basically a trot line hook. They have a big eye on it so you can fit bigger line through it, and they're also stainless. Let's see, single hook or treble hook. I would use a single hook, especially from just a safety aspect. I don't think you're going to have any problem losing fish anyway. All right, so some of these questions might be answered as we go through the trot line portion because it is very similar, just a different principle. So this is an illustration of what a trot line would look like. You know, it could be tied between two jugs or markers and then anchored. But normally when I do them, at least I'm doing them on pretty small rivers, and I'm going to tie one end to a root or a tree. I'm going to drift it over, and then I'm going to have a marker on the end. Or you could actually, especially if you're running parallel with the river, you could just tie both ends or just drop an anchor on one end. So there's several different options out there, but you see the general principle. You've got a main line with drops, and this brings us to kind of that material I was talking about. So this is that nylon style fishing string, and this is a pre-made trot line with clips. So basically you got a main line, and then this thing those clips just clip onto the line, and you're able to put your down leader that goes to your hook, and you can buy them complete kits. But even for your jugs, I like using at least down to a swivel that bigger line like that. And again, it's just a way to keep it from getting wrapped up. It's really, really strong. Another very good thing about the hooks, the trot line hooks, obviously you want to gauge the hooks to the size of bait, to the size of fish. So I've got two sets of jugs. I got one when I'm just going to go and catch, 3 to 6 pound, 8 pound fish. And they got about a 1/0 hook on, pretty thin wire. And I'm just cutting either cuts of skipjack or, a piece of liver, whatever I'm baiting with, and I'm putting it on it. If it gets hung, the trot line hooks are thin enough that I can normally get a hold of it with that strong rope style material like that, and I can straighten that hook and not lose my whole rig. With that being said, if you hook a great big one, there's a good chance they'll straighten your hook. So I have another set of jugs that has big hooks on, 8/0 hooks, and it's not uncommon for me to put a 8-inch piece of skipjack on it when I'm trying to fish for a great big blue cat or something like that, if that's what I'm after. So just keep that in mind. But those trot line hooks are probably the best for either one. So this is just a little picture showing what it would look like as you run that trot line. So normally I would start on the side that's anchored to something permanent like a tree or a root, and then it really helps to have help, because you want one that can kind of control the motor and almost be there for netting the fish and safety, and then the man in the front can use that trot line main line to move the front of the boat down the trot line. And safety is always got to be at the first and foremost, and keeping a good sharp knife handy goes a long ways, because you're dealing with multiple hooks, and you don't want to get one caught in some current, get one caught in you, get drug in, and potentially have any problems. So you just definitely want to keep a knife there for safety aspect. And here's what I guess would be called a trot line box. I've got a couple out in my shop, and this is just an old school way of keeping all of those hooks straight and situated. And basically it's just a square where all your line's going in the bottom, and then each hook is, as it goes around, each one has its own slit. It makes it a lot easier to bait them out. You can tie one end and then just start around the circle, bait and dropping, bait and dropping, bait and dropping, while somebody's running the motor for you. So that's just a little option as far as keeping everything organized. Another good way of doing it is just taking a 5-gallon bucket and cutting slits in the top of it, depending on how many hooks you're going to be running. So we're fixing to get into the bait aspect. So any questions around trot lines and how to run them or how to build them or anything around that? I think I've kind of gathered after doing this a couple times. I think jug fishing seems to be a little more popular just because it can be taken out and put in a little bit easier. And even for me, for most of the things I do, I use jugs more than trot lines. So Rick asks, is there a good time of day? Almost all the fish are going to be some kind of crepuscular or nocturnal animal. So, if when I put out trot lines, I normally bait them late in the evening, run them first thing in the morning. Just because most of the fish are biting either in the evening, at night, or in the morning. But when you're talking about jugs, especially, it's just whenever you're out fishing or whenever you're on the water. So, but normally late in the evening or first thing in the mornings could be your best time. Is there any body of water? Elliot asked, is there any body of water illegal to place a trot line? And yeah, there is some, and obviously for some safety reasons, there was a couple proposals around TWRA and different regulations around trot lines, and I don't think anything really changed. But they're on these really busy reservoirs. There is regulations, and then also common sense goes a long ways. Be respectful of other people using those bodies of water, especially if people are swimming and recreational boating up and down them. But yeah, there's some regulations in place, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. Adam asks, is there legal limits on the length of trot lines? I don't know that it's a length limit, but a hook limit. But I think that I've got a slide coming up that'll cover some of that. Ronald asks, how long of a leader do you put off your main line? If you got your main line sunk, so in other words, you hadn't got it real taut to where it's way up in the water column and you're needing a long leader, I would let my whole main line go down to about the depth I want and then only run about a 12 to 18 inch leader. Ethan asked about keeping bass off some of the jugs. I'm sure it's going to happen every once in a while. A lot of the time, if you do get a bass or a non-target species on one, they'll head shake, and because there's no taut line on them, normally I think they shake free before you ever even run them or know they're on there. But certainly the type baits you use is going to dictate what you catch. Any kind of live worm or live minnow is definitely going to draw more bass and things like that. So if you're really worried about it, you could always go to something like a stink bait. You see pictured there on the left, or your livers, or even pieces of skipjack. And to that point, let's talk about bait. So if I'm fishing a body of water that's got channel catfish and blue catfish, which is a lot of the lakes over here in West Tennessee, I'm normally going to be using liver, night crawlers, or cut skipjack. Liver seems to be kind of one of them catch-all, end-alls. The only downside is it's hard to keep on the hook. You can use a big glob and you can thread it on 2 or 3 times, but still, if you got current or wind, they can get it off fairly easy. I find day in, day out, cut skipjack, which is a skipjack herring. That's what you see pictured on the bottom right there. Obviously, some of you guys don't have as much access as others, but the way to catch those skipjack herring is really easy. If you have any dam systems, especially around the Tennessee River dams, you can throw what's called a sabiki rig. It's got about 8 little flies in a line, and if you ever get into them, I mean, you can catch a bunch in one day, and the creel limit for skipjack is 100. But you can individually bag them in Ziplocs or whatever, freeze them, and then thaw them the day you want to use them. That's what I do. So that's a good all-around bait. And then the night crawlers are really a good bait for, like I said, channel cats and blue cats. Anytime you're trying to catch flatheads, again, you're probably going to use some kind of a live bait. John asks, it's called a sabiki rig, Sabiki, I think. Any questions around bait? John asks, what time of year is the best time of year to fish for them? I like the spring. I mean, most of your catfish in Tennessee are going to pull up into shallower water to spawn channel cats and blue cats normally around rocks, but they're pulling up into these creeks and bays, and they're coming out of their deep water haunts, and that all takes place, I'm going to say, starting the 1st of May, and then I think we caught a 27-pound blue at Pickwick plumb into the 2nd week of June, still had eggs, spewing eggs. So, they have a pretty long period in which they spawn, anywhere from the 1st of May all the way up to the middle of June. And then also, the fall's great, but really just comes down to when you can be on the water. There's so many more boaters and things out on the water in the summer, which could play a negative impact on some of your fishing. But if you're one of them, it definitely don't hurt to get a secluded bay and start trying some different places. It's really a low investment sport, because you can collect 10 half-gallon milk jugs, go buy 10 hooks, weights, and some line, write your name on it, and get you some bait and go throw them out next time you go to the lake, see what happens. If you don't catch any in one location, try another one or try a different lake. So, do you ever cover the entire hook with the bait? Yeah, especially with like liver, because you're just, you're wrapping it. And most of those catfish, they're going to come up, they're going to suck it up, and then it's going to be pretty deep, and you'll hook them in the corner of the mouth when they turn to swim. So I wouldn't worry about covering the tip of the hook. Yeah, Matthew had a good point. Said Procure makes a powder to dry out and toughen up livers. Magic thread, elastic thread, wrapping the livers. And to that point, I've put like garlic, salt, and set them out in the sun and dried them out a little bit. There's a bunch of different ways to toughen up and kind of almost make a blood bait out of liver, but it really just comes down to personal preference. All right, well, those are some good questions. So here, I'm just going to read you a couple excerpts from some of the fishing guide stuff. Trotline consists of a main line with drop lines which single hooks are attached. Drop lines must not be closer than 24 inches. There is no limit on catfish, except only one fish may exceed 34 inches. Trot lines, limb lines, and jugs must be tagged and or marked with the owner's name and address, TWRA identification number. Trot lines attached to the bank must be tagged on the line within 5 feet of the bank. Other trot lines must be tagged within 5 feet of either end. The holder of a sport fishing license may use one or more trot lines, not having a combination of 100 hooks. So the way I read that is you could have 2 for 50, 4 for 25, but you can't out over 100. Sport anglers are limited to 50 jugs or blocks, and only 1 hook per jug. Trot lines, limb lines, and jugs must be run at least once each day and are prohibited within 1,000 yards below any TVA or Corps of Engineer dam. Trot lines may not be set within 100 yards of the mouth of any river, creek, or slough. And that is your general regulations, some of your general regulations that you can find in your fishing guide or the Go Outdoors Tennessee app. And then real briefly, I'm going to run through some examples of some of the rules you might see on individual bodies of water. So, Allen Branch Pond and Chilliwacky Pond in Cherokee WMA are closed to jugs and trot lines. So that being said, there are lakes, ponds, rivers that are closed completely to jugs and trot lines. Bard's Lake on land between the lakes is closed to trot lines and limb lines. Jugs permitted from October 1st to March 21st. So again, they're setting regulations around the busy times on the water in the summer. Beach River Watershed Development Authority lakes, 20 jugs or blocks per person, trot lines prohibited. So there's a reservoir that has a limit on the number that you can put out, and can't use trot lines, but you can use jugs. So I could go on and on and on. There's a full list of the TWRA lakes that have different regulations. Here's just one little excerpt from it. Trot lines and limb lines are prohibited. And then from April 1st through September 30th, jug fishing is prohibited on Saturdays, Sundays, and Memorial Day. So whenever you decide which lake you're going to fish, definitely go to the Go Outdoors Tennessee page, or check out your fishing regulations. Matthew asked, do yo-yos following the same regulation as limb lines? I'm probably not the one to ask, but this would be my take on it. If you attach a yo-yo to a jug, it's considered a jug. If you attach a yo-yo to a limb or set it like a limb line, then it would be considered a limb line. I think the yo-yo is more of a mechanism to help you with either one than necessarily, how you set it. So if you hang a yo-yo from a limb, I would say it's considered a limb line. And what Matthew is talking about, you can Google it, catfish yo-yo or something like that, and it'll probably pop up pretty easy. But what this is a pre-made coil of that nylon cord around a little spring mechanism, and you can actually pull it down, adjust the amount of line you want out, and then set it kind of like a trap. When a fish hits it, he trips that trap, and then the tension will actually, over time, as the fish wears out, normally pull it back towards the yo-yo. So yeah, there's a lot of individual reservoir regulations, so just be sure to check that out. So we're right here at the end. Any other questions? Had some good questions tonight. I get used to saying night instead of evening, because half these are done at night and half are done in the evenings. All right, guys, if you'll take just a second and fill out our post-knowledge check-ins, and then we will wrap up. I'll tell you what we have coming in the way of Hunting and Fishing Academy. We got some workshops coming and things, and we'll cover that with you guys. All right, thank you, guys. And the answers to those questions was, select the largest catfish species found in Tennessee. It's the blue cat. The flathead, it gets real big, but not quite as big as the blue, which I told you exceeds 100 pounds. And then select the catfish species that almost exclusively eat live bait, and that is the flathead. So you guys are right on those. So a little bit about what we got coming. We've got workshops. I just finished up a bass fishing workshop in Lexington last weekend on August 5th. I'll be hosting an archery deer hunting workshop in Henderson at Chickasaw State Park. Uh, Jeb over in East Tennessee had a fishing basics workshop scheduled last week on Thursday, I believe, and it come like an 8-inch rain flooded the venue. So it has been postponed to August 3rd. So you guys still have an opportunity to sign up for that. You can get all that information, tnwf.org, tnwf.org. Go to the Hunt and Fishing Academies tab. If you feel inclined to help support what we're doing, the virtual classes are free. You can go to tnwf.org/virtual donate. And then signing up for the next virtual classes will continue to go through Go Outdoors Tennessee, but you can see a full list of those through our website as well. And then also, if you haven't already, follow us on social media, all the different ones, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So thank you guys for joining us. Let's see, I got a couple of questions. Can you suspend the baits rather than keep them on the bottom? So absolutely, just based on the depth of the water and how much line you let out on jugs, or same principle with trot lines. Adam, I'll be making selections for the dove hunts. So that's another point to cover for you guys still on. I sent out an email, should go out, I think maybe tomorrow, and one went out last week. I'll be making selections for our youth dove hunts, one in Jackson and one over in East Tennessee towards Knoxville, and I'll be making selections for that next week. Christopher asked, what are the creel limits? There is no creel limit statewide, but each reservoir normally has one, so you'll just have to keep checking the individual reservoir regulations. All right, thank you guys.